The hunger of the shadows. The wind howled across the plains as night fell. A small band of hunter-gatherers huddled close around a flickering fire in the shadow of a great rock overhang. The clan had settled here for the night, their bodies weary from days of tracking a herd of mammoths that had vanished into the endless expanse of tundra. Kale, their leader, stared into the flames, his scarred face grim. He was older than most in the group at nearly 36 summers. Although his strength was fading, his cunning kept them alive. But lately, he felt a change in his bones. The mammoths were gone, spooked by something unseen. It wasn't just hunger that gnawed at their bellies. It was the growing fear that they were not alone on the plains. "Tell us the story, Kale," whispered Miri, a young gatherer whose bright eyes reflected the firelight. She huddled close to her sister, Ina, a hunter who clutched a crude spear with white-knuckled hands. The one of the Shadow Walkers. Kale's jaw tightened. He hated telling this tale, especially in the wilds, but he knew it would keep the group awake and alert. The Shadow Walkers were no myth. They were a memory, buried in blood and terror. "They came long before us," Kale began, his voice low. The group leaned closer, the firelight casting strange shapes on the stone wall behind them. Their faces were not like ours, but their hunger was the same. When the sun fell and the moon was hidden, they crept into camps, into caves, taking what they could. Sometimes it was food, sometimes it was us. The fire crackled, and Kale glanced toward the dark horizon. "They don't kill like we do. No clean strike of a spear. They toy with their prey, hunting not for survival, but for pleasure. They thrive in the dark. When they come, you don't see them at first, just a flicker of movement, a whisper of breath. Then they're on you." A cold gust swept through the camp, making the flames gutter. Ina shifted uneasily, gripping her spear tighter. "And how do you stop them?" she asked, her voice steady but strained. Kale looked at her, his eyes heavy with the weight of memory. "You don't. You run, or you die." The group fell silent, the only sound the mournful wail of the wind. For a moment, the night seemed unnaturally quiet. No insects buzzed, no distant calls of wolves or mammoths broke the stillness. Kale felt the hair on his neck stand on end. Miri broke the silence. "What if—" A scream shattered the night. It came from the darkness beyond the firelight, high and piercing, abruptly cut short. The group scrambled to their feet, weapons raised, their eyes searching the void. "Stay together!" Kale barked, his voice sharp. But the darkness was alive now. Shadows shifted at the edge of their vision, darting in and out of sight. The fire seemed to dim, the circle of light shrinking. Ina thrust her spear outward, her heart pounding. "Kale," she hissed, "something's out there." Kale stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's them." A low growl rumbled from the darkness, deep and guttural, unlike any animal they had ever heard. Then came the sound of something heavy dragging across the ground. The hunters tightened their formation, their fire-hardened spears trembling in their hands. Suddenly a figure burst into the firelight. It was Ren, one of their scouts. Blood streaked his face and his eyes were wild. "They're here," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "They took Riva. His words turned to choking sobs as he clawed at his throat. Kale reached for him, but it was too late. A shadow loomed behind Ren, impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated, its face a blur of darkness. A hand, if it could be called that, shot forward, dragging Ren back into the void. His scream echoed, then faded into silence. "Run!" Kale roared, but his voice was drowned by the sudden cacophony of inhuman shrieks. The group scattered, their survival instincts overriding Kale's command. Miri and Ina clung to each other as they sprinted into the night, their breaths ragged. The shadows moved faster than they could, closing in with terrifying ease. Behind them, Kale held his ground by the fire, roaring defiance as he swung a burning branch at the darkness. The flames licked at the shadowy figures, and for a brief moment, they recoiled. But Kale knew it was only a delay. They were toying with him. Miri and Ina stumbled into a narrow ravine, the moonlight barely illuminating the rocky path. Ina pulled Miri close, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. "Stay quiet," Ina whispered, her voice trembling. Above them, the shadows gathered, their whispers like the rustling of dead leaves. The sisters held their breath as one of the creatures descended, its movements unnaturally fluid. It paused, tilting its head as if listening. Miri's hand clutched a small stone. Without thinking, she hurled it into the distance. The sound of the impact echoed, and the creature darted toward it with terrifying speed. Ina grabbed Miri's arm, and they crept further into the ravine, hearts pounding. But the shadows were patient. Kale stood alone by the dwindling fire, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rest had scattered, their cries fading into the night. Some of their screams were sudden and cut off just as quickly. He clutched the burning branch tighter, its embers casting fleeting light against the encroaching dark. Around him, the shadows moved like liquid, their whispering voices an eerie mockery of language. "Come on then!" Kale bellowed, his voice rough. "Face me!" A low, guttural laugh echoed in response, sending a shiver down his spine. He turned sharply, swinging the branch at the sound, but it hit nothing. The fire was nearly gone now, the embers feeble and pale. He had little time left. Kale crouched, pulling a sharp stone from his belt. If he was to die, he would not make it easy for them. He would fight, as he had fought his whole life, for his people, for his clan, and for the memory of those already taken. The shadows surged forward. Kale lunged, striking wildly. His branch connected with something solid, and the shadows recoiled, a high-pitched screech splitting the air. But the victory was brief. More shadows surged in, their shapes amorphous, their limbs impossibly long. Kale swung again, his strength fading with each strike until they overwhelmed him. He fell to his knees, his chest heaving. One of the creatures stepped closer, its elongated face coming into view. It was neither fully human nor fully beast, its features shifting like smoke. Kale met its gaze, refusing to look away. "You won't have me," he snarled, spitting blood. With one final act of defiance, he drove the sharp stone into his own chest. Pain flared, sharp and blinding, but it was his choice, his life taken by his own hand, not theirs. The shadow thing paused, as if startled. Its whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if Kale's act had disrupted some unspoken ritual. The other shadows closed in, their movements erratic. Kale collapsed to the ground, his blood pooling beneath him. His vision dimmed, but a faint smile touched his lips. He had robbed them of their prize. Hours passed. The sisters thought they were safe as dawn's first light broke over the horizon. The warmth of the sun brought a fragile hope. They emerged cautiously, the world around them silent. "Ina," Miri whispered, her voice quivering. "Do you think Kale—" A shadow fell across them. Ina spun, her spear raised, but the creature was faster. It struck with a speed that defied reason, its elongated limbs wrapping around Ina as it dragged her back into the shadows. Her scream echoed, filled with raw terror. Miri froze, paralyzed by fear, as the creature turned its faceless gaze toward her. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as if savoring the hunt. Then it disappeared, taking Ina with it. The silence returned, broken only by Miri's sobs. She stumbled forward alone, her mind numb with grief and terror. The plains stretched endlessly before her, bathed in the indifferent light of the rising sun. The shadow walkers were gone for now. But the memory of their hunger lingered, a reminder that in the vast emptiness of the prehistoric world, humanity was not the apex predator. It never had been.